Hello, I'm Chris, and I want to talk to you today about going back to basics and coding some stuff for the web, something that I've been doing for 20 years and I'm not likely to ever stop. I love the web and I love how accessible it is and I love what you can do with it. So all the resources I'm going to talk about today are available at this URL, aka.ms back to basics. So let's get into it, shall we? I love the accessibility of the web, not necessarily when we talk about disabilities and when we talk about accessibility when it comes to coding, but the access of it. When the web started, out of a sudden, I could watch videos, I could look at pictures. Well, I could pictures loading and videos loading for longer. I could read things. I found people that are also into Star Trek that I can discuss things with. And it basically was a wonderful new medium that I didn't have to pay much for. And I didn't have to get access to it. I didn't. The accessing it was very easy. It was just being online and finding things. And then when you found them, it was even better because I could look at the source of things. I could see how things were done. Like we learned a lot of coding from looking at other people's things and how they've done things. And that way we just learned and shared our information. So by publishing on the web, you also shared how you've done things. And that was a totally new thing for any medium out there, if you think about it. The way to access things on the web is threefold. There's view source, there's scrape and convert, and there's inspecting with developer tools. And I'm going to go through them bit by bit now, and you can probably guess which one is my favorite, but we'll see in the near future. View source is the classic, and old folk of the web were always like, oh, view source cannot die. The HTML that comes from the server has to be the end all. And it's important for accessibility, like screen readers and other assistive technology need the source of the page. They don't need what you generate on top of it to a degree. It used to be important for SEO as well, not so much anymore because crawlers have become much more sophisticated as well. But there's one issue with view source. It's dead. It's kind of like only for old websites out there. View source doesn't get you the content of pages anymore. It gets you most of the time just a framework where content gets loaded in and gets generated in. So the other day I blew up Twitter again. I posted this thing and it was basically me working in developer tools and trying to find something out about Facebook. And I looked in the elements view and I saw no HTML and I was wondering what the heck is going on there. Turns out the HTML is so nested that I had to scroll all the way to the right to actually find that information and see the HTML. And the HTML that I found looked like this. It was divs with classes and divs with classes and more divs with classes. And all of these classes are unreadable. They look like a registry code for Windows back in the days. I was just wondering what's going on there. And the thread was hilarious. Lots of people going back and forth. This is the right thing to do. Facebook are the best engineers on the planet. They know what they're doing. What are you talking about? Other people say, oh, divs are terrible and classes should be readable. So it was a good old internet romp where we started communicating or actually arguing a lot as well. But the reason that why HTML in Facebook looks like this is actually quite bizarre if you think about it. The reason is that basically the goal is to fool ad blockers and to disallow scraping. Makes sense. They don't want their content to be scraped and put somewhere else. And ad blockers is how they make money. Basically, there's nothing free. Somehow, somewhere, someone has to pay, and that's mostly ads. So view source is kind of for artisanal HTML any longer, and most of the big players on the web, like the Gmails, the Facebooks, the Twitters, they actually generate their HTML as a rendering target, which is a good thing. It can be a good thing if you generate only the HTML that is needed for a certain environment, for a certain device, but it's kind of bizarre if that is the outcome of it, if it's just to fool ad blockers and disallow scraping. Talk about scraping, that's a thing I've been using for quite a while as well, and a lot of people do. You basically use a programming language and a networking tool like curl or wget or something like that to load content and then change it on your device. So I've got a few PHP scripts to batch download things from hard to navigate sites and these kind of things, but it's very error prone. The problem is like if the website changes, your scraper has to change or you don't get any content. It's also questionably in a legal sense, like of course getting content somewhere and putting it somewhere else, not necessarily the nicest thing to do. And as I said, HTML gets generated on the fly for different environments nowadays. So which of the rendered HTML did you scrape? What do you want to simulate being a mobile phone before you scrape, or get that content or get the full content? So it's an arms race. You try to scrape things, the website tries to protect you from scraping. It makes no sense to actually rely on it for something. There's third-party companies that scrape for you, and that is even more questionable in a legal sense, but let's not get into that one. The most versatile way to get content off the web is, of course, developer tools. I'm kind of biased being a principal program manager for developer tools, but it's amazing how deep they got, how much access you have. You can actually override and change things locally. And it's not only markup, script, and styles level, it's also all kind of network stuff. So for example, when I find a website that has a video that is overlaid with lots of click ads and pop-ups, I normally go to the network tab and see if there's an MP4 in there, right-click that one, open in a new tab, and then just get an HTML5 player to watch the video that gets hidden from me with ads and all kind of other things. Something to play with. So let's quickly talk about remote control. What do I mean by that? Browsers are not only browsers anymore. They are software platforms that you can build upon. And all of these can actually be remote controlled. So whatever a user does in the browser, like go to this link, click on it, download it, enter dogs in that search box and send the form off. All of that can be automated from the back end and with different engines out there. And one of my favorite things to use in that one, and that's going a bit beyond this talk right now, but I wanted to just show it to you because I have a lot of fun with it, is called Playwright. Playwright is a Node module or Node.js library that runs the Chromium, the WebKit, and the Firefox browser on all platforms for you. So you can actually simulate devices that you don't have, or you can pretend that you are that device to get that HTML and the content for that device from a website. So this one allows you to see what your product looks like in all these devices from the command line as well. It's super powerful and it's rather clean as well. So it's wonderfully written. I'm excited about it. But let's talk about enhancing remote web content. That's something that is a problem. Most of the time, people think everything is maintained and access to it is rather easy. You join a company and you can start fiddling with the code and fixing things out there. But there's lots of companies out there that have websites that have been untouched for years and they cannot be accessed any longer. And sometimes you find things in them that you're not happy with. You want to change. One of the ones that I use, and now it gets geeky again, is the CSDB, the C64 scene database. That's like IMDb for videos or for movies, but this one is like scene releases of the demo scene for the Commodore 64, which is something that I've been doing for a long time and I still do. Now the website looks awful by now. It's like written in, 1998, 1997, and it's too small to read, and it's kind of hard to use. So when I, for example, look for a certain group and I look for a certain release, I have to scroll down and I have to click on each of the releases to see them. So I click on them, have to go back. There is no back button either. And I basically have to click on that one and go back, much like the web was in 1997. So I thought I'd do a better thing. I write this one for myself. I wrote this little thing to drag in, and then you just roll over it and you get the preview of the image and the third last comments that people typed in there. And for the next few slides, I'm going to explain to you how I've done that using developer tools. Okay, this might not apply to you, but this could be for fixing your bank site or fixing other sites as well. So all of this is applicable. And I just wanted to show you how wonderful it is, how much access we have to the web and how we can change things. We're always in control to a degree. So step one, inspect the page, find what you need. So in this case, I just opened the developer tools, looked at the elements pane and started clicking around in the HTML and see what kind of structure we have. The structure I found was the following. Each of these releases has a link called release with the ID. And when I clicked through to the page and looked at the page and looked at the image URL, I realized that it basically is the same ID. And there is a folder thing that basically is like the first 3 characters and then 000 at the end of it. Don't know why it was done that way, but I was just trial and error trying different images out and finding it that way. And then I looked at the HTML and thought about getting the comments, and I realized there's no structure whatsoever to it. There's no UL, there's no list like I would expect, or even a definition list or something like that. It's basically just B tags followed by comments, followed by tables for layout. And that was not fun, but I thought, okay, I cross that bridge later and see what's going on with the images first. So step 2, manipulate the page during development. So what can I do to get the content of the page and also the styling of the page and inject some of my code into it? The simplest way, of course, is the console log and just typing things into the console. There's also a snippets in the sources view, but I found one thing that is not as used, and I think it's incredibly useful. And it's called overrides. This has not been properly documented. I'm writing that documentation right now. So by the time you will watch this, the documentation will be available as well. What overrides do is the following. So you go to the page that you want to do something with, and down here we have a cookie consent banner because it's a European page. So I know this JavaScript will be in every page on that site. So I look into the sources view and I look for something like cookie consent, and there we go. There's a cookie consent thing. I click on it, and I can also pretty print it if you want to look at the code and understand what's going on. That's very useful because most of the code nowadays on the web is minified. I can now go to overrides. And overrides, I select a folder on my hard drive called overrides, which I created before. And then I allow the browser to write things there. What I do next is take that code that I wanted to play with, the cookie consent one, right-click it and say Save for Overrides. So this one saves a copy of that one in my folder. You can see that little purple dot on it. That means it's not the one anymore that is actually from the site. So now I can write an alert in there. And I could do that in my editor as well, because you just edit the file on your hard drive now in that folder. And if I now reload the page, I'm in. I can override the functionality and add to that script. So that script comes from my hard drive right now. And I can do the same thing with styles. I can go to the styles pane, for example, here, and right-click the styles and save it for overrides and have it in there as well. And that is persistence. Every time I load the page, it now loads that code from my hard drive and I can play with it. So this is a great way to fix older websites, and before you contact the client and say, like, this is what you need to do to actually fix it. Step 2, get the content you need. So I need to get the images and I need to get the reviews. Okay, the link to image URL is something I put together. I'm not too proud of that code, but it does the trick. So I basically get the href from the link, and then I do the 10,000 thing, and then I basically slice it to the 0 and make an ID out of it. There's a problem though. Like, okay, the PNG is only for the static ones. Some of them have GIFs. So I needed to find a way to actually see if the image exists. Normally I would have done an image object and create and catch the error of that, but I found a better way. Fetch is an API that's been around for a while. It's just the replacement for XHR or Ajax, if you want to say. It's basically a way to access web content or access URLs in a REST environment in JavaScript. And REST is not only get and post and whatever other things you use, but there's also head. So to check if an image exists, all I needed to do is do a fetch request with a method of head. And if the response is okay, that's the image. If the response is not okay, then I had to replace the PNG with the GIF and create that one. And then I catch and do a console log on the error, because that's a to-do for later. We're hacking here. We're not doing useful things. But I find it interesting that just by using the head, I never load the image. I just test if it exists. So this is a great way to actually test if something exists before you load it, to make sure that end users don't get any broken images or something like that. And then I took a look at the HTML and I was like, okay, how do I get these reviews? Okay, best weapon of choice, regular expressions. I love regular expressions. They're also horrible, greedy at times. And when the HTML is not properly structured, it can be quite painful to do that. And then I realized browsers have a good thing built in that actually makes HTML useful. And that's the HTML5 parser. There's nothing more forgiving than the HTML5 parser. When XHTML died and we came up with HTML5, we basically said end users or developers make mistakes all the time. The browser should actually fix those and try to guess what that meant and do something with it. So whatever HTML you throw into a browser, something useful will come out of it. Some tree that you can navigate through and some document structure will come from it. And the fun thing is this is available in JavaScript. There's a DOM parser API. So all you have to do is call a new DOM parser and then parse the string, the HTML string, as text in HTML. And then you can start navigating around in it. So I'm getting now the reviews by using query selector. So the parse query selector all, every link with an href that has scener inside the href should be the one that basically, oh yeah, that's the name. And then the following table is the one that actually has all the comments in it and these kind of things. I also casted them to an array because node lists are fun, but they're actually live, and arrays are easier to slice things on or map or filter. So array functions are quite powerful. So the casting thing, not the best performance thing, but in this case, it's not that much HTML that I'm actually parsing. Now, how do I make these changes available? In the past, I had my own servers and put a lot of random code there, sometimes insecure code, so I got hacked. And I basically wanted to make sure that nowadays I want to make sure that people can access my code and play with these kind of things. So GitHub, to me, is the answer. GitHub Pages is something that used to be quite weird to do. Like you had to make a GH Pages branch from your thing and had to always keep it in sync with the main branch. But they made it much easier now. So I'm using Git for version controlling for everything now because I'm stupid and I overwrite things. And with version control, I can never lose things, which is a wonderful thing to have. And it also makes me comment my code as push commits much better. So it may be a better developer. So the GitHub Pages the GitHub Pages flow now is much easier than it used to be. All you have to do is in your repository, go to settings, and in the settings you define which branch should be the published branch. So the code is not only available as the raw code on GitHub, but it's also executed on the GitHub servers. So in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can actually just host anything on GitHub Pages yourself. And that keeps it all in context where people can file requests. They also can see your stuff, which is pretty amazing. The URL structure is predictable as well. So you got github.com, your name, your product, or you have yourname.github.io/your product. You can also assign a domain to it. If you own a domain, you can also do that. I love it because it's basically now that the server is GitHub's, and I'm not going to put any ads on that one or anything like that. I don't want to control that server. I just want to make sure that people can access it. Now, how do you inject the code into the page? Like with the overrides, I could do it on my machine, but I wanted to allow other people to do it as well, because they should use my betterment of that website, so to say. So the best way I found for that for years is the Bookmarklet. A Bookmarklet is a bit of JavaScript that actually takes creates a script element and injects it into the page. So in this one here, when I'm doing local testing, this is my script that I'm using. And if I do remote testing, if I want to see what the live one on GitHub looks like, I'm using this one. This is a very old trick, and it's a very simple thing that still works. You can then go to your browser, create a bookmark in your bookmarks folder, in this case Firefox, but the other ones have it as well. Make sure you inline it and basically give it a good name. So I got CSDB local, CSDB live here, and you can see I have others as well. So this is a pretty old school thing to do, but I find it wonderful to just play with some website and give it out to other people to play with as well. I actually was asked a few weeks ago to do an alt text rollover. So basically to have a simple way to see what the alt text on an image is like. And this might look familiar because it was more or less the same code of what the one that I used to make the CSDB page better. Now, the Bookmarklet code injection is kind of straightforward. This is really cool because it's easy to maintain for myself. All I have to change is the JavaScript file, and nobody needs to install it. People just click the bookmark and they will always get the newest version of it because it's basically available for them. It gets injected from the web. The code also runs in context, which means you have full access to the browser features. And the problem is, though, that it's blocked on some sites. So in Twitter and Facebook, it didn't work. So I had to find another way to do that alt Bookmarklet kind of thing. thing, and that was a browser extension. Browser extensions are kind of harder to do. They have bespoke APIs, so you have to understand how that works with the background pages and all kind of things. There's also a slight difference between browsers, but there is a good converter to actually turn the Chromium ones into Firefox ones. The problem that I found is that it doesn't have all the functionality of the web or the browser. Like web components are not available in extensions yet, unless you go through simulating them, and that's not fun. It's also more involved install. So basically people have to go and install it from the different markets for the different extensions. And it might affect performance because extensions running in the background doing something to every HTML is a thing that slows down your browser. And a lot of performance issues we have in browsers is because of extensions. And there's also a review process. So my extension wasn't available for 2 to 3 days until it was reviewed and it was allowed. It's just kind of annoying. So the Bookmarklet is easier. So if a website that you want to make better actually allows for bookmarklets, use those. They're now available in the market, so you can play with the extensions there. And you can see this is also a GitHub page where I used Jekyll to actually generate it from the README. This is not my look and feel. That's why it looks pretty. And actually, this is what GitHub does for me automatically. I want to also talk about using the platform a bit. What I found playing with these kind of things, that I always push myself a bit to try out new things, to try new things in HTML that I haven't done before. And the biggest thing in when you use a bookmarklet to inject something into another page is that you want to separate your code from the other. You don't want to have any clashes with names. You don't want to have the styling of the website bleed into your little widget that you put into the page. So the simplest way to come up with that is something that has been around for quite a while now: web components. Web components is a wonderful thing, but every time we talk about web components, people immediately go, you need this framework to use it. You need to use web components with React, with FastDNA, with lit HTML, and so on and so forth. Here's 10,000 node installs before you actually can use web components. But web components are wonderful because they're actually HTML elements that have everything inside them. So you can, this is a HalfStack name tag, for example, and you can just use it in HTML. In this case, it got 2 attributes, text and color. And you can either generate it with JavaScript or you can use it in HTML itself. And it's now natively supported in browsers. So this is the whole code. This is all the code that I actually wrote to make that HalfStack name tag thing. Kind of simple to think about. There's a lot in there. It's good. There's great documentation for it if you want to play with it later on. But if you think about injecting something somewhere else, a web component is always a great idea. I also wanted to simplify interfaces all the time. Like my first get to is like build something complex and then realize, hang on, there might be an easier way of doing that. The other day I found a great API. It's a dog API. Oh my God, great. Dog pictures, random dog pictures or pictures by breed. And it's just a simple URL that you can get a GET request and you get a JSON object back. And I wanted to start playing with that immediately. If you haven't seen it yet, the developer tools now have something called Network Console as an experiment. So in this one, I just pasted in the URL and then I fiddled with the queries and I changed things around. And I just wanted to see what data comes back rather than doing that in JavaScript or doing that from the command line. I can do that directly in developer tools right now without having to actually look at the page and look at the JSON not rendering in the browser. This is a really nice tool just to play and look at what APIs do you. This is also connected with a networking tool. So in any network request, you can right-click it and do edit and replay, and that would open it actually in that one. Another thing that you can dive really deep into what's going on with the website out there. So in this case, I found out that it's an object, and the message is basically where each key is a breed of a dog and an array of how many subbreeds are in there. So some of them have subbreeds and some of them not. So the first thing I did was actually build a dropdown, because dropdowns is something that I've used for years, and it's kind of complex. So you actually have to go to the main breed and then you have to show the subbreed, and keeping that accessible to keyboard users and to screen reader users was kind of a hassle, and it's actually not fun to use as well. So dependent dropdowns have been the bane of my existence as a developer for quite some time. And I think we can do better. And we can do better because there's a data list attribute in HTML5 that I don't see much use of, which is kind of sad because it's really amazing. All you do is have a list attribute, on your input and options inside the data list. And what that one does is turn that input into an autocomplete. So in this case, I now actually just list Australian and Australian Shepherd and Australian Boston and so on and so forth as own options, much like I would do in a select element. Select element also has a nested way, but this is not supported and it's absolutely horrible to use. So in this one now, what you do is you just have random dog pictures again, because dog pictures are great. And then you can type in things and you get the autocomplete. So in this case, getting to Mountain Bernese is not 5 clicks, but it's just typing in mountain and then Swiss or Bernese to get there. So look at the HTML5 spec and what is available. Look at can I use to see what the support of it is. Sometimes you will find really amazing things in there given to you by the platform. So let's do a quick fire round about things that I love using in those kind of environments. Event delegation is something I've done since 2005, I think. So this is a list of links, and the normal way what people will do with that is loop through all of them and put an event handler on each of them. Or when you use an environment, you basically do it through the router and you click on that one. But when you do DOM manipulation, a lot of people just loop through each and every one of them and attach one event handler on each of them. But events bubble up and they also go down. So all you have to do is put one event listener on the UL, and then you read out the target. And if the target in this case has an href, then I know it's a link. And if it's the node name of it is li, then I know it's actually the li. And this is really powerful because it works when content changes dynamically without re-indexing. So that list I could use a fetch request to put more content in there. I don't have to re-index it ever again. I have one event handler that just sits there at the ready for me to do the thing. And it can react to different elements being clicked differently just by checking if it's got an href or looking if it's got what the node name of it is. Empty attributes and style selectors are a wonderful thing as well. So when you define a complex message style and you want to show and hide it, you normally just add another class to it to show and hide it, or you overwrite the original style, but you can just use message empty. Like any HTML element that doesn't have any content, this CSS will be applied to. So when you do an accessible way to hide things with CSS, putting it in an empty selector in this case makes total sense. Same as you can check by attributes. We already saw that with the scener thing in the ahref, but in the images as well. Before I did the checking if the image can be loaded, I also checked if the image is empty, then just don't show it. So when you put like a border or something around the image and you don't have a source on the image yet, it will not show that empty border and pop it up and make it look ugly or something like that. All of this can be done in CSS. You don't need to use any JavaScript for that. Flexbox in CSS is incredible. Of course, grid is also great, and that's next for me as well. But Flexbox I like because it works for little components inside the page. So you get granular control over the look and feel of them, and the browser does the calculation work for you. So you can say like this one should be 1/3 and this one should be 2/3, and you don't have to mess with percentages and rounding errors and then padding and margin. It does all that stuff for you out of the box. Labels are something that is important for accessibility, and they come with so many wonderful side effects. They're much easier to style than form elements, and they actually increase the hit area. So if you have, for example, a checkbox and you have a text next to it and the label is on that text, you can click the whole text and not only the little checkbox. That is great for accessibility, for screen readers, and also for any user out there. And they're super powerful with checked focus and so on and so forth as well, because you can style them that way. So here's an example. Radio group. Radio group, another thing that's not as used as much as I would like it to see. A radio group is very old, and it allows you to actually select one thing from a group. A screen reader would actually announce this as a group as well and tell you like 1 of 5, 2 of 5, and so on and so forth. All functionality you don't need to write yourself. So in this case, I have a name browser that actually collects them and makes them into a group. And this is what it would look like without any styling. It's not the prettiest, but again, as I use labels, I can click on the names of the browsers to highlight that radio button. And I can just write this much CSS to style it. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. So this is using Flex to actually align it, and you got like the column gap stuff to do the gap stuff for you, so you don't need to check which is the first one and the last one. And I hide all the radio buttons by positioning them absolutely off screen. And then I just basically style the label connected to the radio button. and I then check if the radio button was checked and give that one a green color and the other one should be gray. This is all I need to do to make a nice navigation like that. And the functionality of the radio button means I don't even have to keep in my code which is the current clicked one. The browser does that for me. CSS generated content is something that if you want to do something visually only, that's a great thing to do because it's all maintained in the CSS. And here's an example that I want to show you that's coming up in interviews a lot. The weird pattern that we have about this whole list item click. People want to have this kind of look and feel, but they want to be able to click anywhere in that thing to highlight that link, to follow that link. So headings and texts are actually not things that should click anywhere, and but this is not XML. And in JavaScript, it's sometimes kind of tough to do that. The simplest way to get this, if anybody ever asks you, is actually to generate CSS around it. So this is the HTML. It's a UL with a H2 in there, a P and an A href. And all I do is basically give position relative to the li element and then create an overlay with top left, right, bottom 0 and position absolute or after the link generated with an A after. So this one will now overlay an invisible, because there's no background color, over the whole thing, and I can basically click it, and that way I can change the color. I cannot change the color, but I can follow the link if I click on it. Focus within sounds a bit zen, but it's actually a pretty good new thing in CSS that is almost like a parent selector, not quite as a parent selector, but quite good with it. It starts the element when one of its children inside it has focus. So in this case, if we go back to that example, if I now define the peach puff as a background color, because it's a lovely background color, and if I now define a focus within on the li, as a change the background of the li, when somebody focuses with a keyboard on the link or clicks on the link, then actually the whole thing becomes that wonderful medium orchid color as well right now. Nothing you had to code, that's something that CSS does for you now as well. So I hope I inspired you to actually not see the web as a given, but as something that you can play with and something that you can change, and you can still do view source with developer tools to find out how some things were done and how to make something better that has been broken for a long time. Because you have all the bricks, and creating something is a beautiful process. It's something, just do something. Creation is fun. Don't listen to the haters out there that like, oh, this is not professional, this is not how you would do it. Just play with it and do it for yourself. If you don't want to give it out to the world, that's okay too. It doesn't have to be perfect, but by playing with things, it can teach you something, and you can start learning more in detail later on when you want to use it professionally. So the more you use the platform gives you, the more it becomes second nature later on to when you do a design review and you're like, this looks like a data list to me. This shouldn't be this very complex interconnected select boxes any longer. So hopefully you're as excited as I was about this and you can play with us. So I'm Chris Heilmann, Code Poet on Twitter, HDevTools on Twitter as well, and christianheilmann.com. All the stuff I talked about will be cleaned up and uploaded at the Back to Basics URL. So have a great HalfStack.
Welcome. So Chris, Bookmarklets, that's like my favorite cruel job interview question, because I like to give it to people to see, like, one, if they'll think I'm a horrible person, like making them do something they would never use. But two, it's like one of those simple things that's just there everywhere that we never use, but like makes you think and makes you be creative. And what's one of your like favorite things in the web that like you rarely use, but then when you're reminded of it, you're like, oh, I wish I used this more. It's a nice thing.
Well, I mean, that basically was it for me as well, like taking other people's code and mixing it again. Like, I mean, this is how we started, like everybody pretending that we learned JavaScript not by copying and pasting from other people's websites and changing numbers around is a liar. So we basically, I found it so bizarre when I looked at when I was looking at the 3D view of the developer tools, and I was looking like, okay, let's find a website that's really deep. And I opened Facebook and then I looked at that HTML and then posted that tweet about it. And I was like, it just blew up. Everybody was like, that discussion was just going back and forth between people like, oh, the web should be simpler. And the other ones are, the web is just something that you generate code for. And I was just standing in the middle of that. And I'm like, I know that we moved on, but why are we actually writing HTML to fool ad blockers, and we put ad blockers in place, although we understand it shouldn't be free. And it's just, we forgot that the platform web should be there for easy distribution outside of closed environments. And I think as much as I use Facebook as well, and I use Twitter, and I use all these things, I just love the idea of publishing something on the web. And that's why I love it that it became much easier with things like GitHub Pages and also Netlify and all the other platforms to just host something somewhere. I love, for example, earlier when Natalia was giving a talk and she was just using CodePen for the whole thing. And that's pretty amazing as well. And I was wondering, like, okay, we don't want to make ourselves dependent on it. Like, what if CodePen goes away? What happens then, kind of thing? But if we also keep it in version controlling, then it's a good thing to have. And version control is something that I found I start everything with right now. As I said, I am clumsy. I overwrite things. I delete files that I shouldn't delete. And if it's actually version controlled, then I never have that problem.
The thing I seem unable to copy and paste is Flexbox. I think that's like just a horrible API to learn by copy and paste. No matter what I do, I get a different box than I expect.
Yeah. It's in general a problem with CSS that, like, I think if you know CSS well, you actually use as little as possible. You use shortcut notations for everything, and everybody else looking at your stuff has no idea what's going on. So it's a language that lends itself to like professionalism in a certain way, and people who actually don't understand it will have an issue with it. I mean, we now released grid tooling for developer tools, for example, to have like a visual overlay to show you what the grid is like, and that one is getting extended to Flexbox now as well. So I think if you have a proper CSS layout engine now that we have, we're not simulating it with floats and positioning anymore. I think it's time we get better tooling for it as well, and not just expect everybody to know everything. And I myself have given up on grids so far as well. I mean, I tried to several times to look into it, but I was like, okay, I got other stuff to do, so I wait until I give it to somebody who cares more about it, or I basically find until the tooling does it for me.
Dylan, have you played Flexbox Froggy or CSS Grid Garden?
I have, but it's hard to copy and paste that into my badly formatted like React code or Dojo code with like 50 levels of hooks and other stuff, right? And I mean, that was actually my other question for Chris, like where's the hook for bookmarklets? I don't get it. It doesn't compute. Actually, there probably is one, right? So
Sure. I mean, what I like about bookmarklets, it also shows your age.
Well, I don't think I need my code to do that. Someone who very much flattered me this week and said, "You haven't aged a day," and I'm like, "Yeah, I have, but thanks for being nice."
Well, I mean, my problem as somebody working on a browser is that there's far too many extensions out there, and a lot of them are really horrible, ineffective code. So a bookmarklet or a snippet, an override or something like that could be much easier to do a lot of those functionalities that people have. And there's a lot of malware and a lot of like horrible adware in extensions, and people just install random things. I mean, I get reports from people saying the browser is slow and they got like 50 extensions running, and you're like, yeah, I know why your browser is slow. There's like everybody's fighting for access to the page there. So I think these little details to override things and to put things in there might be a good idea, not to have yet another extension out there, because I would love more and more extensions to go away and actually become browser functionality, because some things make sense. As I said before, like the automated captioning is a great idea, but the business model of a lot of services is like you cannot download a video until you're signed up for it. So all these extensions that are people using and thinking they're clever are actually illegal. You might as well just pirate the same video kind of somewhere else. So I don't get that model. There was a follow up to that HTML tweet that I had as well, where I talked to people and said, like, well, with ad blockers, you don't get free stuff either. You just get stuff that you actually stole to a degree. Like of course, the ad environments are absolutely awful, but they will not get better if we keep blocking them. It's an arms race where we block more and they get more invasive. And I don't understand some of the things anyways. Like the other day I tried to buy a shirt, and while I was browsing the website, the newsletter popped up and said, like, do you want to subscribe to the newsletter? And I'm like, who builds these things? Like, who wants to stop me from buying things on your website? There must be some telemetry or some information that these things work, but the web is full of super annoying things by now because
we're starting to get to that time of year where Wikipedia becomes a big ad for like supporting Wikipedia each year. So it's even the best sites struggle with this sometimes, right? So yeah. So how's life been without flying? I know you fly, I mean, not as much as me, but you fly quite a bit. And now we've just been grounded for 8 months now, 7 months, something like that.
It was kind of weird. I mean, the first few months I was like, oh my God, what's happening to my status? Now I actually don't care anymore because, I mean, there's
there's no lounges to go to or places to stay. Yeah.
And I moved next to the airport here in Berlin because I came from London and there it was easier to travel anywhere. And then today the airport is closing down, and actually the next airport is going to be on the other side of town if I ever need to fly again. But I kind of found trains. I mean, I have to look at my family from time to time. My mom's didn't do well in between, so I basically took the train. And it fascinates me that in Germany you can drive 530 kilometers by high-speed train with internet connectivity on the train for 38 euros. And it was just like, this is amazing. This is really something I never considered. I was like, okay, that's a 40-minute flight. I'm going to take that one. But if I sit at home for 4 hours in front of my laptop, or I sit on a train with free coffee in front of my laptop, that's the same thing. So I found that interesting. But it's also cool. It keeps you a bit more humble. You just basically weren't just like, oh, I'm cool. I'm at airports all the time. I get all these cool features. And now you're like, you're just like, oh, I have a balcony. This is awesome.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's really cool about airports when you fly a lot is that it makes them slightly more tolerable rather than like a place you actually want to hang out or spend time. So it makes sense. Cool.
I mean, the lounge access, also with your credit cards, you get you got free lounge access. You can get tickets for concerts, and you can get free access to some extra flights. And I'm like, yeah, all of these things are not happening at the moment.
None of these things are useful anymore.
Yep. Now they give Netflix rebates, so that's kind of cool. At least in the US. Yeah.
I'm still using my ex-girlfriend's Netflix account, but she's using my Disney Plus, so that's okay.
Ruining her recommendations constantly.
Yes. You're like, let me figure out what terrible show I can ruin your choices with.
Well, that was also the case. I've been the first one in my family to have a credit card. So whenever I bought Amazon stuff for my family, for the kids and for my mom and for everybody in the family, my recommendations were all over the place because they thought I'm 3 different people. So
nice. Well, we are 4 different people here, but we have very similar hair today. You might have noticed the intentional orientation of the ginger and pink and the lighting. So thanks, Chris, for giving us an amazing session. And up next is Anna and Christina.